Hello, welcome everybody. To those that are here and to those that are joining me later from the comfort of your home. Um, I do want to make an announcement about due dates before we begin. And due dates are important when we're in person because we get to fire everything at the same time. So things have to be ready at the same time. We're in a different situation where a lot of you got clay later or weren't able to get clay at the same time, and you have different work schedules and whatnot. So because of that, it's not that crucial that you turn it in by the due date. And I say that not so that you can procrastinate, because it's never a good idea to do that with play, as you might know. But so that when you turn projects in that you're proud of, that are really high in quality. So even if the due date arrives and you still haven't managed the technique into something that you are proud of, then work on it until you have something that it's really good. Okay. Because I could tell if something was done the night before or if something was done sort of um, without much effort. Clay doesn't lie, and so to that extent, um, turn turn things in when you have mastered each technique, because I'm going to grade you on the quality rather than on when you turn it in. But I do recommend that you do turn things in as soon as you master them, and that you don't procrastinate, because each technique is going to build on its own. If one technique is giving you trouble, say the coil method, and I know a lot of you are having trouble with the coil method. I know because we had several student hours, and it's something that I've been addressing. Move on to the next technique, maybe the other technique, and then come back to it, or come back to the pinch if you didn't do a perfect pinch bowl, and then turn something in. And even if you already turned something in and you want to turn something in that is better when you master the technique, then go ahead and do that. But don't worry too much about the due dates. Think more about quality. Think more about you learning the manipulation of clay rather than something that gets turned in urgently. Okay. Okay. So with that said,
Can I ask a
um,
quick question?
yes, yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
so when I'm photographing my process, sometimes there are like more than 5 steps. Are we allowed to do more than 5 photographs when we turn something in?
Correct. The instructions say at least 5 images, but you can definitely, especially because you might need to show, how you slip and score things, how you join things or whatnot. Okay. Um, Definitely. You and even your mistakes, you could photograph your mistakes, as long as you cover with your images the things that are um part of the criteria. Okay. And I do want to emphasize that if this class is feeling that it's difficult, it that's how it usually goes. It looks very simple, and then things could get a little bit challenging. And that's okay. I just want to reassure you that by the end of the semester, if you keep working with the material, you'll be fine. So if you're thinking about dropping the class, don't. Okay, you'll be fine. It's normal that you're struggling at this point in the semester, especially because we're not working together, especially because you're doing it on your own and you might be kind of working in the dark. Um, so write me and we could set up a Zoom. And I've been meeting with a few of you through Zoom, and the questions are very different than when I do the demos. So feel free to join these Zoom sessions that I have. I've been putting them in the afternoon, so that people that work during the day could join us in the afternoon. But let me know. Weekends are hard for me, but I'll accommodate. I'll try to accommodate different people's schedules. All right. So with that said, we're gonna get started on one of my favorite techniques out of these four techniques,
Can I ask
and
a
that is
question
the
really quick?
Kurinuki. Yes, ask me a question. Go
I
ahead.
was just wondering, will we be getting feedback like individually about our pieces or just like advice we might have, like that sort of thing, critique?
Definitely. So this is different than regular art class where we critique as a group. because um, in person that only works in the last part of the semester. During most of the semester, you're learning technique. So I'm giving you feedback on technique. It's a purely technical class. So it doesn't help for someone, for the blind to lead the blind in critiques, right? For someone who doesn't know about the material to give advice to somebody else that doesn't know the material. We're all learning together. So in when I grade your pieces, I've been writing use very brief uh, advice that of how you could improve. But I've also been doing videos. If it's the right time of day, I've been doing videos. But if you ever need more in-depth analysis of your work, then we should set up a Zoom session so that I could tell you exactly what your strengths are and where you could improve. Because even if you master the material, there's always room for improvement. And that's what student hours are for that type of feedback. But we won't be having group critiques. It doesn't fit into how this class works. But I do encourage you to share your work in the student gallery that I put in the discussion, and then you guys could kind of see what you guys are doing. Make sense?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to, let's see. I'll do my desktop so that I could show you a couple of things. We're going to, for those of you who were able to ah, get clay, a different type of clay. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. But we are going to, apologies. Say from the start. We're going to do the Kurinuki method. We're going to learn the Kurinuki method. It's basically hollowing out, where are you? Okay. Hollowing out a form that appears as if it was solid. Okay. And this is a technique that it's normally not part of a ceramics one class. It's not a what you would know as a traditional technique, but you do get an understanding of volume and space, and it sets you up for understanding trimming when you form things on the wheel. So the idea of this assignment is for you to do something that appears, we're going to work with something that it's a solid block of clay, and then we're going to gradually hollow it out, and we're going to give it a foot. So these pieces look very distinct because of the way that they are cut, the way that the knife has sort of created a little bit of sheen on the clay. And with this technique, we always leave some, in the studio, we always leave things unglazed on the outside. We are going to make a functional cup. We're going back to function as opposed to the previous technique. And we're going to really exercise our patience here. Because in order for us to get certain marks, you have to allow the clay to be in the later part of the leather hard stage. We're going to work on the inside of the form first, because the inside is going to determine the how the outside is going to follow that. Okay, and if you look at the inside, the outside has to follow the form. So if you work with a block of clay, however you carve the inside, the outside has to follow. And so the thickness of this clay, as with other pieces, has to be an eighth of an inch to a quarter of an inch, no thicker than a quarter of an inch because of functional purposes. The inside has to be smooth so that it doesn't collect bacteria. Okay. And so when you carve the inside, that's how you have to follow it from the outside. And in other words, this would be unacceptable. And this is something very, very common where this area remains quite heavy. And so in person, I'm able to see and feel the weight of these objects. And this is where the challenge is going to be for you. So I'm going to address how to avoid having uneven areas that could potentially explode in the firing process. Okay, so you don't want to have areas that are thicker than others. You want to have an even area. You would remove this extra clay to create something that appears as if it was a rock or something that looks like if it's solid. And the inside is, of course, going to be very, very smooth so that when you glaze it, there is no texture that would hold bacteria. And of course, we're going to give it a foot. Okay. And you can see that it is very, very thin at the rim. Okay. So the rim could be very sharp. It's part of the aesthetic of this technique. Here, this is not a traditional technique, and it doesn't work with larger pieces. And I'm going to explain. Very few artists work this way. Okay. So this piece is obviously a finished container. You wouldn't be able to hollow this out from this little hole. What you would do instead, you would split it at the leather hard stage in half, hollow it out except for the edges, and then put the edges back together and blend them so that you have this solid looking form. Okay. This piece, for example, was probably created not by hollowing it out through here, but by splitting it in half. And then this part gets hollow, this part gets hollow, and then they get joined here. This is Bess Kavanagh Stitchner, and she works solid with clay, which is very laborious. It's very non-traditional, but it allows her to give each of these pieces, and these are life-size pieces, a lot of detail. Okay, but what she does is that she cuts these out, she maps them, and then she hollows these out to about a quarter of an inch and joins them back together. It's a very laborious process that involves a lot of very slow and delicate drawing, but she's a master at this technique. You could kind of see here how thin these pieces end up being. And because she's joining these pieces and then blending them together, she then, how do you call it? She uses an armature to hold these pieces up. And you can see in the kiln, they are split apart because then she would join them after they have been fired. She doesn't use glaze, she uses paint. So that's an advantage because you could hide cracks and whatnot. If you do something this big, though, with the technique that I'm going to show you today, I could guarantee that it would split in the drawing process because anything in ceramics, it's hollow. There's absolutely nothing that it's solid, okay, that it's fired, okay. And so you can see the armature here. You can see how she maps it out. She's there all the time, so she's watching the drawing process. She removes each piece and hollows it out, and this is where you see the piece rearranged again, reattached, and painted over. You can see the armature here. In ceramics, we don't use armatures because armatures don't shrink. And so if you wrap clay around this armature, as the clay shrinks, it's going to be confronted with this metal and therefore crack. And so when you see people working with armatures with small scale pieces, that is probably oil-based clay, and a lot of animators use that. But we're going to work with water-based clays, and we're going to do something that appears to be simple. And we're going to work with a block of clay a little bit wider than the outcome of the final piece. So in this piece, you're going to map out mentally or physically the shape of the cup that you're going to carve out. Remember, these are a quarter of an inch thick or so, no more than a quarter of an inch. And the shape of the heap will, the inside is going to determine the outside. So this will get removed. And you'll want to, from the above, you want to give yourself a lot more width than the actual cup. Because if you start with something narrow, your cup, you won't have enough space to get inside and carve the clay out. So you want to start with something a little bit wider, give yourself room on the outside, and enough space for you to put your hand inside with a tool, as you will see me do. Okay, we're gonna begin with it with this tool, and you're going to notice that I'm going to use the round part of the tool, because if I use the sharp part of the tool as my point of carving, this is going to create crevices that then I have to go back and align with the knife. Okay, so this is the feathering knife. You can see that I'm using the round part, and then I'm going to go back with the feathering knife because this is parallel. It's going to give me a very nice clean inside of my clay. Okay, and then at the end, I'm going to use the trimming tool, the regular trimming tool, to map out the bottom. I'm going to be mapping out the bottom and then getting rid of this unevenness from the inside with the feathering knife. Now, if I go too deep on one of these, I might be too close to the edge and I might make a hole, which is very common. It happens to me all the time. Okay. So I'll probably address how to avoid that and how to repair it if that happens. Okay. And in the end, hopefully, we would have something as beautiful and precious as one of these cups that appears to be very, very heavy, but in reality, it's very light because it's so thin. And here is the clay um, being clay. Okay, so that's the end of that. Any questions? Okay, so let's see. Okay, we're going to be mixing clay, two clay bodies. Okay, now let me share my screen again, but let me get out of this PowerPoint. I just want to close. Okay, share screen. Okay, so we're going to, I'm going to be mixing clay, and the clay that you have is Vegas buff. Okay, if you look at the information, it says that it shrinks 12%. Okay, a young lady asked me yesterday if she could use two different types of clay body when she makes her cup. So if the clay body is from a dark clay and maybe a lighter clay for the handles, usually we don't join pieces of clay bodies that are different because they shrink at different rates, with the exception of using a clay body. So if you use Russian River, which is a red clay, it also shrinks at 12%. So that means that these clays, when joined together, will be shrinking at the same rate. And that's the only exception when you could join two pieces of clay in the same piece. Does that make sense? Okay. And so that's going to be on your quiz or final. I forgot. It's going to be a question of when can you blend two types of clay bodies. You're going to see me that I mix two clay bodies right now, but I'm not going to blend them completely because I want to create the marble effect. Now for this assignment, you can, because we're in quarantine and you might only have one color of clay, you can do that. You could work with one color. But if you're able to get two types of color of clay, you could attempt this technique that I'm going to show you, okay? And so let me put this up here. I'm going to blend my clay, and I'm going to get a little bit of red clay. And this red clay is a mixture of recycled clay, okay? But it's red. It had a lot of clay bodies with iron, okay? And I'm going to give myself a nice piece of clay here, okay? And I'm going to make it a bit round so that when I join it, I'm not trapping air, okay? So this is a bit round. It's not perfect, but it allows me to have a round shape so that I don't, when I slam it with the other piece, it's not flat to flat and I'm not trapping air. So wait for me there, clay. Then I have some white clay here, and I'm going to get about the same amount. Okay, this is also recycled clay, but of white clay bodies. And let's see. Okay. I'm also going to, oh, this one's a little bit wet and sticky. Okay, So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get a round edge to a round edge, so when I slam them, the air um, could pop out in a sense. Okay. And now I'm going to blend these, but not too much. Okay. Because I do want them to stay separated. Now, even if these two clay bodies had a different shrink rate, it would be okay, because as in a small object such as a cup, it's not that much tension during the firing process, if you will. It is, but because they are blended, they're sort of negotiating by pushing and pulling each other, and you won't necessarily get too many cracks. If you were blending different clay bodies on a larger piece, you're dealing with much more chances of it cracking. Now, obviously, this is too big for a cup. Let me clean this up; it's a bit sticky. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut it. Maybe I could do 2 cups out of this, but let's cut it to see how it blends. Okay, let's see. It's okay. It's not bad. There's a little bit. If I blend it more, I'm going to turn it into a cohesive clay body. So I wanted to stay separated so I could have the marble effect. Now, if you look at this closely, and you know what? I just realized I don't have my lights on. And guess what? Oh yeah, I am recording. Okay, give me a second. I'm so sorry. Didn't turn on my lights. You're able to see okay, but this is better. Okay. There you go. So now you can see that the clay, it's a little bit blurry. Okay. It's blurry because it's wet. Okay. So now this is going to give me 2 cups. I'll do a smaller one than a bigger one. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to shape it into a solid form that I'm going to carve out later. If I start now, the clay is too wet and it might not behave too well. Okay. But this will give me the circle that I was talking about, the one that I showed you in the PowerPoint. Okay. So let's look at my cup here. So this is going to definitely give me a more narrow cup than this cup that I have here, because if I don't want to flip it over because I have liquid inside, but if I were to flip it over, it would not be enough room. So this cup would be a little bit more narrow than this cup that I have. Okay, it maybe gives me a different type of cup. So even though it seems like it's a lot of clay, at the end of the day, because I'm giving myself room to carve on the outside, okay, so I could get the finishing touches, this might not be enough clay. Okay. Now let's see. This is probably going to be a little T-bowl because it's a smaller heap. Okay. Okay. So what I'm gonna do, I'm going to allow these to firm up and maybe address them depending on the weather. Right? If it was nighttime here in LA, 70 degrees, I could leave them on cover overnight, indoors, and by the next day, the clay will be a little bit more firm. And I'm going to show you why I want this clay to be a bit more firm. Okay, here's my wheel. Let me clean this a little bit. It's a little bit messy here. That clay body was a bit too wet. I pulled it out the drying slab a little too soon. And I did that because it's so hot here that the clay, as I work with it, it dries up. So it's better that it's a bit wet. Now, if I try to shape this piece at this point, it might be, well, I could certainly start, but I have to be very careful because it's flimsy. It could collapse. As I thin it out, I already know that this is going to wobble and then I'm going to lose the shape. Okay. So I want it to firm up and it's very sticky. I have to remove the clay out of the tool. So it's going to take me a lot longer. Okay. So I'm going to let it rest. Okay. This is the technique that, again, is going to test your patience because you're going to begin it and now you have to rest it. So you might do something else. Okay. So this is going to sit in the background somewhere and just wait for me to, I'm going to ignore this piece for a bit. And a few hours later, the piece is going to be a bit more firm. Now, if I were to cut this with my knife to see if I have a great that marble effect, I do have it, but look, I smeared the clay because it's wet. The outside of this piece, it's something that I'm going to do at the end, okay? Because I'm going to be touching it as I hollow it out, and at the end, I'm going to carve the outside to give it the finishing touches. So I'm going to begin with this, okay? And let me see if I switch. This is a better view, and you guys could tell me if this is a better view. Where are you, iPod? Okay, let's see. So let me know if this is a better view. If not, I could switch back to the computer. But basically what I'm doing here is I'm using the thicker part of the tool, and it's like carving ice cream, if you will, okay? And I'm being very careful that I'm not going all the way to the edge, okay? So if you imagine what my cup is going to look like, it might look something like the edge. I'm going to give myself some room to remove the outside edges. It's going to be a quite narrow cup, okay? And if it's too tall, I could cut off the excess later. But basically, it's going to probably look something like this, okay? Okay. It's a narrow cup, okay? But I think for what I'm going to do, it works perfectly fine, okay? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to carve this, and you see that the clay has resistance because it dried, okay? I left it open overnight, and then I came back in the morning and covered it. But you can see that it has resistance. The clay, it's not sticking to my tool. I could remove it. I could kind of go fast. You want to do it careful, okay? Is this a better view, or do you want to switch back to the other view?
I
I
think the
think
other
your
view is
hand,
better.
yeah, the
The
other
other
view
view is
is
better?
better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sometimes your
let's
hand
do
too much.
that. Perfect, thank you. I'll never do this again. Where are we? Let's see. There you go, spotlight. Let me know if you see me now, okay? Is that better? And I'm gonna
Yeah,
tilt
we
it
see you.
over. Okay. And
Yep.
I'll just tilt it. I'm just gonna tilt it, okay? We're gonna keep it like that, okay? Oh, your hand's on the way. Okay. So let's see. Close. Okay. So I'm using this part. I'm twisting it. So this wheel is really nice because it allows me to twist it. I'm not struggling with it in the air. I'm not holding the cup. Okay. And it's getting messy here. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna trust my fettling knife or a butter knife or the equivalent, and I'm gonna keep it parallel like this. Okay. And then I'm going to again twist it, and because I'm keeping it parallel, I don't have to come back later and clean it up. The knife is already kind of giving me a really nice edge. See that? I'm gonna push it this way because my knife was a little bit this way. So I'm gonna go this way in the next time. Okay, I'm gonna go like this and continue to remove some of the clay. And I'm going to give myself a lot of room because at the end, I'm going to carve out the, the, the outside. But you can see that it's really nicely behaved. It's firm. It doesn't, it's leather hard. If you want to think of leather hard in 3 stages, it's at the second stage where leather hard still has plasticity. It's the first stage. You could move it a little bit. You could attach things. In the second stage, you could still attach things of leather hard, but it's a lot more firmer. It's not bone dry yet at all. It's firm. It's when it's getting close to bone dry and you begin to see a little bit of dust. It's the third stage of the leather hard uh, stage. Okay. Okay, so because it has resistance, it allows me to continue to carve quite efficiently. The clay is not sticky, it's not getting on the way. The tool that I'm using, see how it's somewhat round? Okay, that's what it's doing here. If this was a little bit wider, I could use a little bit of a fancier tool. I got this at Blick, I think, a nice little package that came with this and this little art store in Long Beach. Wasn't that expensive, but this gives me, it's about the same thing. It just has a longer handle, so it allows me to go deeper. Okay, and as I twist it, I'm gradually removing the clay. Okay, and I'm about here. I'm gonna stop because I want to give enough space so I could carve out a foot. Now I'm going to pick it up with my knife. Where's my knife? And I'm going to clean the edges now. I'm going to hold it parallel, and I'm going to be careful not to stab the bottom. Okay, there you go. So I'm going to hold it and hold it parallel. And this is better if you do it gradually. Okay, gradually. Nice. Good. All right, this clay is really doing well. It's not giving me trouble. All right. Okay, Clay. Really glad you're not a toddler like my toddler that gives me trouble every day. Okay. Sorry, I was thinking out loud, but the clay is behaving really well. Okay. So you can see that it's a little bit rough. So what I'm gonna do, I have this thing. It's a chisel or something like a chisel, but it's flat. But I also could use a ruler, a regular ruler, even a paint mixer from the hardware store. And what I'm doing, because this has a 90-degree angle, I could just sort of very gently remove the excess clay, refine that L shape so that it's parallel. Okay. And then at the very end, I could go back in there with my finger and smooth that out. This feels a little bit wet still. I'm gonna allow that to firm up before I go back in there with my fingers and make it a little bit firmer and smoother. Okay. Now I started with a block of clay and I gave it a regular shape. If you want to be a little bit more adventurous, you can create something that it's more like a chalice. This is going to be a chalice. I'm allowing this to firm up. This is going to be the rim. You can see the inside. You can see the foot. It's going to be the foot. So it's going to be a chalice. And I made a couple because I know that out of these three, I'm going to lose one for sure, or two, or all of them. Okay, so it's firm. I'm going to cut it soon. Okay, so as long as the inside dictates how the outline follows it, that's the thing that matters. Now, this is a little bit more firm. Okay, now with this one, I could definitely go inside and smooth it because it has a lot of resistance. Okay, so it's just my finger, no water at all. You can see that it's in the later stage of the leather hard process because it's powdery. And I'm really going in the bottom, and I could spend 20 minutes smoothing it out. I'm not going to take your time that way. But what I want to show you is the difference between carving the outside. Say that I'm really not done carving the inside, okay? If I want to be very aggressive and give it very aggressive marks, I could, right? I could be very careful because this is parallel. I'm going to look at it from above like this so that I'm really sort of paying attention to how close I'm getting to the outside, okay? So what you're not seeing from this angle is that I'm looking at this straight from the top. And if I wanted to be very aggressive and leave aggressive marks, I could do that, okay? But to be honest with you, this works better when this is bone dry because it appears as if you carved something from stone. So I'm gonna wait for this to get firm so that I could then address it when it's bone dry. But I'm gonna be very careful. What I'm gonna do, I'm going to use this box cutter, okay? And I'm going to show you what your outside is going to look like, okay? So if I cut it, and you want to be careful, always point the blade away from you. And in other words, don't do this or don't hold your finger this way and ow, okay? So always keep that area away from the blade, away from anything that could get damaged, like your fingers. And if you want a clean cut, you can kind of see the gradation there. Beautiful gradation of this clay that is going to give me the marble effect. You could also play around with a little bit. What I like to do, sometimes I twist the blade and then I pull it and I leave these areas that are torn, and it appears as if I tore the clay from the body of this piece, okay? And ideally, you want to do this gradually, okay? And do this gradually. I have a charcoal stick at the bottom of this. I don't know how I got there. But basically, you want to remove clay gradually. And think about the design. Think about, do I want a lot of hack marks, or do I want a really nice clean line? Or do I want a combination of clean lines and maybe a combination of things that appear as if I tore the clay in place? Remember, look at that. I like that, right? I like that tear that it has. Except that the thickness here, it's quite thick. This could explode in a firing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove some of that thickness here. Okay. So this is almost as if I had a handle. The thickness sort of diminished because I removed some of the clay here. Makes sense? And so I have another blade that's a little bit wider. And so I could go a little bit faster. It's like peeling potatoes. To remove most of the clay, I'm going to slow down when I get to the edge. I always go through with these by accident. Okay, look at that. That's a beautiful tear right there. I might leave that. Okay. And so, okay, I'm getting very close. So I have to slow down and really be strategic about my final cuts, if you will. Ow. Okay. Now, I also don't like this edge. It contradicts the sharpness that I'm getting here. So what I'm going to do, as I remove the material, this edge is going to also guide me, because now what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove some of this edge so I could have a clean edge here, because it's also going to tell me the thickness and how close I'm getting to the inside line. Okay. I might do a little tear there so it's not perfectly even. But now you can see that I have a lot of thickness to go. You see that? But if I look at it from straight up, I could then see how close I'm getting to the interior of this cup. Ow. So as I do that, can I answer any questions for those that are live, joining me live? You guys think
I have a
Go ahead,
question.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of, so when I work at home, I work on a wooden desk. So what would you suggest for a supplement for a surface? Like I tried parchment paper, kind of feel dumb, and a few other things, but I just I feel like I'm going to damage the surface of the table that I have to be able to use.
Have you tried cardboard, like thick cardboard, or even poster paper?
I'm sorry, what kind of paper?
Cardboard or poster paper?
No, I haven't. I will try
Okay.
that this evening. Thank you.
You could, but the other thing also that I recommend that I know works for sure, cardboard tends to bend if the clay is too wet. But if you go to a hardware store in the near the lumber section, they sell maybe 2x2 or 2x3 segments of drywall. Okay, and what you do with this drywall, you just tape some blue painter's tape around the edges so that you're not touching the edges of this drywall, and that tends to be a really nice surface for you to wedge clay. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? So I'm going inside. Even though I did a really nice clean cut yesterday, I'm going to reveal some of the layers, because you can see that it's blurry on the inside because it was wet when I did this. So now that it's a little bit dry, I could definitely touch it up. Even though the inside is going to be glazed and I might not be able to see the gradients between the red and white clay. I could definitely clean it up and it's really nice and smooth, okay? So I'm getting very close to the edge. I could definitely keep going. And again, spend another 20 minutes, gradually play around with some of the way that I pull. Maybe instead of doing it this way, I do it this way. I twist the handle and now I have this um, edge that appears as if it was carved. It reminds me of Utah, or it reminds me of Sedona. For those of you who have been out there looking at the stones, the sandstones, that's that's the gradation of this. Now, to do the foot, I could do a number of things. I could keep it at the edge, or I could do one of these both. If you're not sure how deep to go, you can take a needle, poke it, and now I'm going to take a ruler and say, okay, this is 2 centimeters, almost 3 centimeters. So I know that if I carve 2 centimeters, I'm sorry, millimeters, I could, no, centimeters. I could definitely be on the safe side, okay? So let me remove this drawing stick that I have here. I guess I placed it here on a table in the studio. So I guess that's going to be part of the design, okay? And I'm going to give this a foot. Again, the foot could be at the edge. I'm going to do something that's a little bit more on the inside, okay? And I'm going to use this little guy here, okay? So on the inside, I didn't have to do this. On the inside, usually I have to do this to define the bottom. With this one, I probably did a little bit, but the tool that I was using was really good. But when you define the inside, you want to go very lightly, and that is going to somewhat cut and define the edges of the bottom, okay? And then you gently sort of like blend it in. But you could think of this as a tracer, if you will, okay? So I think I made it a little bit wider than I needed to, okay? But if you're not sure how deep to carve, remember, I could go 2 centimeters and I will be fine. So let's see where I am. Oh, wow. I only went 1 centimeter and it felt scary. It felt like I was going all the way through. Okay. See? Okay. Let's see. 2 centimeters. Oh, getting close. I could be a daredevil and dig a little bit more.
What were the clay bodies that you said you were working with again?
Say what?
What are the 2 clay bodies you're working with again?
These are recycled clay bodies. So they're both a mixture of different bags of clay that I just have in the studio. And I just sort of, I have a bucket for white clay and a bucket for red clay. And I recycled them.
Oh, okay.
So you can see that it's deep, right? So it's 2 centimeters. The thickness there, it's about less than 1/4 of an inch. So I have to be careful not to go through. So it's good that I measured it with the needle tool. And now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna give it a really nice aesthetic by, I know how far I could go. I could go that far without going through. But now I'm gonna tear away this so that it looks, oh, look at that. Looks like a rock or something, okay? And so I'm gonna play around, maybe clean this one up so it contrasts that sharp rock area, okay? And let's see. Any questions? Because I'm almost done with this demonstration here. Okay. That's okay. All right, let's see. Now, so how long did that take me? Like 20 minutes?
Yeah, about.
Okay. I'll put my name on it somewhere. Fire it up. Sell it for like, I don't know, 300 bucks. That should be nice. 250, something like that. What do you guys think? 20? Anybody?
350.
20? 20? You'll take 20? Yeah. Do I hear 25? 30? Going once? I'm kidding.
Could
So,
you like get that much though?
oh yeah, for a cup, yeah.
Wow.
If I sign it, yeah. $30. No, I don't know. To be honest with you, I don't make cups, so I would not know how to price cups. I make cups. The ones that the reason why I don't have a sample here is because at the end of the semester, the demos that I do, I give them away when we're in a regular semester. But there are artists who sell their cups for 200, 120, 80 is super cheap. And depends on who the artist is and what style of cup. This is a common style. It's not something that it's somebody's unique work. It's anyone could do this. Yeah. And so I think when we were having that discussion with Narciso, we spoke about what makes a work of art original or what makes a cup original. And so a lot of people, when they do, like, there are people out there that sell their cups for 300 because they have their own style, their name, and all of that. So that has a lot to do with it. Okay, it's looking good. That little hole that I had there, I'm gonna just blend that clay. Boom, it's gone. Now the glaze will cover it. It feels nice. It feels really good. But I'm gonna get greedy, and I'm going to definitely make this into a super deceiving cup. It's going to look super heavy, but when you pick it up, it's going to feel like a feather. Okay, and that's the trick. That's what you want to do. You want to push yourself. And with this technique, as with other techniques, you might like the third iteration better. So give yourself. I made a bunch just so that I could do this demo, but I'm gonna finish them because I really love this technique. I could definitely spend some time. So I'll probably view a Glenn Adamson lecture on design and carve some cups. You can see that I have air pockets there. You see that? Because I didn't blend the clay too well. And when you have something, when you have two different clay bodies, you want to blend them really well to avoid air pockets, okay? Air pockets, if you fire too quick during under 300 degrees an hour, you will lose the pieces. They will explode. But when I fire things, I usually fire very, very slow because I'm firing large sculptures. So a little air pocket in a cup, it's not the end of the world, but you do want to avoid them if you're going to fire your work in an electric kiln that fires quite fast, okay? And again, I'm leaving the outside at the end because I don't want to smear it. I don't want to touch it and now all of a sudden I'm smearing it. Even though this is dry, it's quite resistant. It doesn't smear very easily. It's fine. But the outside is the last step in this process. You don't want to do the outside first, even though it's tempting because you want to see what it looks like. Okay. So you can see it's quite clunky. It's quite heavy. I don't like the foot. I'm gonna do something about the foot. I'm gonna cut it up a little bit and see if that helps it. Okay, foot. Let's see. Is that better? It's okay. Okay. If you want to be playful and you have slip, you could throw some slip on it so it has a different aesthetic. A lot of these have added slip that makes it look smooth and it contrasts the sharp area. What I would do, or what I'm going to do with these when I get a chance of glazing them, I'm going to glaze the inside, and I'm going to talk about glazing next week. I'm going to glaze the inside, and maybe when I pour out the glaze, because I'm going to pour the glaze in, swivel it around, pour it out, and as I pour it out, I'm going to allow some of the glaze to kind of drip on the edge here. So and maybe I'll dip it in a different glaze a little bit so that it has an interaction with the other glaze. And now I have mostly raw clay and some glazed area. With this marble effect, you want to use, you don't want to use a glaze that will cover that effect. And most glazes at Cone 10 cover that effect. Even transparent glazes interact with the iron in the clay. Okay. I have a question in the chat. I bought a cheap cutting board. Yeah, that would work. Any piece of wood would work for wedging clay or working on clay. But there it is. There's your Kurinuki cup demo. I'm gonna allow it to firm up, and when it's a little bit more firm, I'm gonna thin this down so that it's paper thin. Okay, so that it's super light, and then very carefully, I'm going to then take it to my friend's house and have her fire it. I have a sample here of a cup that I'm going to be doing, and so uh, it's porcelain, so this is going to shrink like 15%, and I'm gonna paint on it. Oh, I have a crack here. Okay, I guess I'm not painting on this. Okay, but that's your demo. What questions can I answer? Would I be giving away your demos this semester? Yeah, sure. If I could get them fired. I don't have, I could bisque them, but I don't know that I could take them to Cone 10. Eventually I will. I'm gonna hook up my kiln hopefully soon, but yeah. What other questions can I answer now that I have you here? Now that I have you as a group?
I had a question about the
Hmm?
shrink rate.
Yeah.
You said you're using like recycled clay, so how would you take into account shrink rate for that?
So these, because it's blending, yeah, it's sort of kind of, in a sense it's intertwined. You could think of this as braided hair. So even though they have different shrink rates, that in a small scale piece like this, it doesn't affect it too much. It negotiates how it moves, how it shrinks. But if this was something bigger and you're, like one of these animals that Beth makes, and one of the foot is shrinking at 13% and the torso is shrinking at 10%, then you're gonna have a crack in between. But um, maybe there's a small difference, like 12% and 11%, or 10% and 12%. It won't make a difference in something this scale. Again, this technique, if I wanted to do something this big with this technique, it would be almost impossible, because as clay dries and it shrinks, it develops cracks, structural cracks, stress cracks, and it won't survive. I tried, and it doesn't work. Um, but for a small cup, it works. But it also, can we use your kiln when you get it working? Sure. I'm gonna need some pieces to put in my kiln, to be honest with you, because a kiln needs to be packed in order for it to be fired efficiently. So yes, I'll let you guys know when I do my first firing. Okay. Um. So with that said, it at this scale, it's perfectly fine. You're not it's not that, if let's just pretend that this was, the white part was like porcelain that shrinks at 15% and this was 10%, it might warp it. It might warp one way or another, but you won't be able to see it too much because it's so small. At this scale, you could definitely get away with it. And look at all the pieces that I made for the demo. So I'll be entertained today. Okay. Um, I think I covered everything that I wanted to cover. If you look at the description of the assignment, it tells you the things that you should think about, how the space from the inside relates to the space on the outside. Okay. Um, and so the outside parallels it. So if you carve it and it's more like a V, then you have to carve the outside more like a V. Or if you carve it so that it's more like a chalice, which this is going to be a chalice, then you will be able to follow. I'm gonna follow that, the inside of that and the inside of that. So this is going to be a nice hourglass shape, and it's ready because if I, ooh, this dried a little bit too much, but because this is a little bit more resistant, I could definitely be a bit more aggressive. And if I like that effect, I would leave that effect. But I'm not. I'm gonna follow that line. It's going to be a nice um, little nice cup for maybe some I don't know, fall's coming, so maybe some nice scotch or something, or maybe I don't know, something nice and tasty in a little container like this. Okay, what other questions do you have? What can I cover? What can I talk about? Where there's a specific book by Glenn Adamson that discusses cups. Um, Not necessarily cups, but yeah. Fewer and better, fewer and better things. Fewer and better things discusses ceramics. Um, if you want to listen to some of Glenn's lectures, you can Google Glenn Adamson. I have it here. I was watching it yesterday. Closed it. Where are you, Glenn? Um, Design and Dialogue, and I was watching Silverman, Adam Silverman. That's ceramics. So if you Google Design and Dialogue, Glenn Adamson, you would get to his page, and you can watch some of his talks. He talks mostly with designers, and at the end of the semester, he's going to be giving us a lecture on how ceramics has been impacted by the digital age, specifically social media. So it's going to contrast the lecture by Suzanne, where Suzanne took us to the deep history of ceramics. Glenn is going to take us to contemporary ceramics and how the digital age and things like social media affect what people are making. So prepare your questions. It's going to be very interesting. Um, and that would be towards the end of the semester. I'm gonna hang out. I'm gonna stop recording. I'm gonna work on these pieces, and I'll be happy to answer questions. But for the sake of time, I'm gonna stop recording.